My parents always chose my brother, but when he found out what I was worth, he flipped a table at Christmas dinner. My younger brother Kieran was the one my parents built their whole identity around. When he wanted a car at 16, my dad took him to the dealership on a Saturday like it was a holiday. When I turned 16, my mom handed me a list of part-time jobs and told me independence builds character. When Kieran dropped out of his business degree to pursue music, my parents called it brave. When I worked double shifts at a warehouse to cover my own tuition, they said it would make me stronger. And after a while, I stopped filing complaints about the unfairness and just got quiet and got to work. I moved across the country at 23, got into tech, nothing that looked impressive from the outside, just grinding through early-stage companies that most people had never heard of, taking equity over salary when it made sense, reinvesting, staying patient, and about 6 years in a company I had joined in the first 12 employees got acquired, and then a second investment paid out, and then a third, and I did not buy anything flashy or post anything online or tell my family because I had learned a long time ago that their attention was not something I actually wanted. I still drove the same truck, still lived in a house that looked completely ordinary from the street, and when my family asked about work, I said it was going fine and changed the subject. Then my grandfather passed and we all gathered at the estate lawyer's office, and I sat in that room expecting nothing, and what came out instead was a letter my grandfather had written before he died that outlined every loan he had quietly given my parents over 15 years. The total was just under $380,000, and the documents showed almost all of it had gone directly to Kieran: tuition, rent, a failed clothing brand, credit card debt twice, a used BMW, and my parents sat across the room looking at the table, and Kieran looked at the wall, and nobody said a word for a long time, and then the lawyer kept reading, and my grandfather's remaining estate was split equally between all grandchildren because he wanted things to be fair, and he put it in writing, and I had to look at the ceiling for a second. Within a month, my parents started calling more. Kieran texted out of nowhere asking how I was doing. Questions started appearing in conversation. How was work going? Had I thought about investing? Was I renting or did I own? Did I think real estate was a good move right now? And I answered everything pleasantly and gave away nothing. Christmas at my parents' house, about 18 people, dinner going normally, football on in the background. My uncle asked how work was and I said honestly pretty good. And Kieran laughed from across the table and said he's always been secretive, and then looked directly at me and said, come on, seriously, what are you actually worth now? And the table got a little quiet and I said I'm comfortable, and he said that's not an answer. And then my cousin Marcus, who had had 3 glasses of wine, said wait, you guys genuinely don't know. And his face did that thing where someone immediately regrets starting a sentence, and my dad said no what? And Marcus said the acquisition, the second one, and the room shifted and my mom leaned forward and said how much are we talking? And Marcus said the number, said it clearly, said 8 figures, said it loud enough that the television felt quieter after. Kieran put his fork down. My mom's hand went to her mouth. My dad looked at me like he was trying to remember who I was. Kieran stood up slowly and said I sat here this whole time acting like everything was normal, and he was not calm when he said it. His voice was doing something unsteady. And then he started talking about family loyalty and missed opportunities and how I had never once offered to help, and his hands were shaking, and then he grabbed the edge of the table and I genuinely thought he was about to flip it, and my mom grabbed his arm and my dad said Kieran sit down, and he did not sit down. He walked out through the back door and slammed it hard enough that the wreath fell off. My parents followed him, same as always. I sat at the table with my aunt and uncle and finished my food. My cousin Marcus stared at his plate and said sorry, and I told him it was fine. Over the next few months, the requests came in like a slow tide. A loan for a new idea Kieran had, a family investment opportunity my dad framed as a favor, an emergency my mom described as temporary, and I declined every single one the same way, politely, briefly, without explanation. When my parents called 6 months later asking if I could help cover something for Kieran, I opened my email and sent them a scanned copy of my grandfather's estate documents with every transaction highlighted and no message attached, just the numbers, just the pages, just the receipts of a decision they made across 30 years. They have not asked again. Kieran sent one text in January that said I hope you're doing well, and I read it and put my phone down and thought about it for longer than I expected, and then typed back you too and meant about half of it.